The stuffed blue elephant dangled precariously from little Noah's chubby fingers as he dozed in his travel stroller. Madeline Parker watched her son's chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath, grateful for this rare moment of stillness after the chaos of security. Being a single mum at 28 wasn't what she had planned, but Noah's sweet face made every struggle worthwhile. She checked her watch. Still 30 minutes before boarding their flight to Boston, where a new job and fresh start awaited them. Just a quick coffee, Madeline whispered to herself, wheeling Noah toward the nearest cafe. The terminal buzzed with early morning travelers, their footsteps echoing across the polished floors of Chicago O'Hare International Airport. She ordered a latte, balancing her wallet in one hand while keeping the other firmly on the stroller. When the barista called her name, Madeline reached for her drink, accidentally jostling the stroller. The blue elephant, Noah's beloved Ellie, slipped from his grasp and fell to the floor. A businessman in a hurry kicked it inadvertently, sending it skidding across the terminal floor. Madeline gasped, eyes following the toy as it disappeared under a row of seats. "My coffee, please," said a deep voice behind her. "I'm running late." "I'm sorry, I need to—" Madeline gestured desperately toward the vanished toy. "My son's elephant." The businessman rolled his eyes and stepped around her to grab his order. Madeline quickly secured the brake on Noah's stroller and darted toward the seats, dropping to her knees to search for Ellie. The toy wasn't there. "No, no, no," she muttered, scanning the busy terminal. Noah would be inconsolable without his elephant. It was the last gift from his father, before Mark had declared parenthood too much and walked out of their lives. "Excuse me," Madeline approached a cleaning staff member. "Did you see a small blue stuffed elephant? My baby dropped it just a moment ago." The woman shook her head sympathetically. "Sorry, ma'am, haven't seen anything like that." Madeline returned to Noah, still mercifully asleep, and checked the time again. 20 minutes until boarding. She made a quick decision to search the surrounding area, pushing the stroller hurriedly through the terminal, eyes scanning every corner. 10 gates away, Jackson Hayes stepped out of the first-class lounge, phone pressed to his ear. At 35, he was one of the youngest CEOs in Chicago's competitive tech industry, having built Hayes Innovations from a dorm room project to a market leader in security software. "I understand the concerns, Richard, but I won't delay the Singapore deal," Jackson said firmly. "The board will have the revised projections by tomorrow morning." He ended the call with a sigh, running a hand through his dark hair. A flash of blue caught his eye, something small on the ground near a water fountain. Jackson stooped to pick it up, a worn, stuffed elephant, clearly well-loved. He turned it over in his hands, noticing a small tag sewn into the seam. Out of curiosity, he read the handwritten name, Noah Parker. Jackson froze, the name hitting him like a physical blow. His fingers tightened around the elephant as memories flooded back, memories he had spent years trying to suppress. Parker. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? The name wasn't particularly uncommon, but still the timing. He'd just returned from the 7-year anniversary memorial for his best friend Mark Parker, who had died in a car accident shortly after moving to Chicago. The friend who had confided in Jackson about leaving his pregnant girlfriend because he wasn't ready. The friend whose guilt and regret had been evident in their last conversation. "Sir?" A flight attendant approached him. "We're about to begin pre-boarding for your flight to Singapore. I need a moment," Jackson said, still staring at the elephant. Making a split-second decision, he approached the nearest information desk. "I found this stuffed animal," he explained to the attendant. "Is there a way to locate its owner?" The woman smiled. "We can make an announcement. What's the name?" "Noah Parker," Jackson replied, heart racing. "It's on the tag." The announcement echoed through the terminal. "Would Noah Parker or his guardian please come to Information Desk 3? We have found your lost item." Madeline's head snapped up at the mention of her son's name. Relief washed over her as she quickly steered the stroller toward the information desk, Noah now beginning to stir. When she arrived, she saw a tall man in an expensive suit holding Ellie, his back to her as he spoke to the attendant. "Excuse me," Madeline said. "I'm Noah Parker's mother. You found his elephant?" Jackson turned, and the world seemed to slow down around him. The woman before him had familiar hazel eyes that made his chest tighten. She looked different from the photograph Mark had once shown him, more confident, more weathered by life, but unmistakably the same person. "Yes," he managed, extending the elephant toward her. "I found it near gate C12. "Thank you so much," Madeline said, taking Ellie with obvious relief. My son would have been heartbroken. This was a gift from his father before he... She trailed off, not wanting to burden a stranger with her story. Jackson couldn't tear his eyes away from her face. She didn't recognize him. They had never met in person. Mark had shown him a photo once, telling him about the amazing woman he was leaving behind. Jackson had argued with him, had told him he was making a terrible mistake, but Mark had been adamant. Noah began to cry, small hands reaching for the elephant. Madeline quickly gave it to him, and the child's sobs instantly quieted as he hugged it close. "I'm sorry," she said to Jackson. "We're about to board our flight to Boston. Thank you again for finding Ellie. You've saved our trip." "Boston," Jackson repeated, his mind racing. His company had an office in Boston. The Singapore deal could be handled remotely. In that moment, staring at Mark's son, the spitting image of his late friend down to the dimple in his left cheek, Jackson made another impulsive decision. "I'm actually heading to Boston myself," he lied, already pulling out his phone to change his flight. "Business trip." "That's a nice coincidence," Madeline said politely, already beginning to push the stroller away. "Thanks again." "Wait," Jackson called after her. "I'm sorry, this might sound strange, but is your name Madeline?" She stopped, turning back with confusion and slight alarm in her eyes. "How did you know that?" Jackson swallowed hard, unsure how to explain the impossible situation. I think I might have known Noah's father, Mark Parker." The color drained from Madeline's face as she stared at the stranger holding Ellie. "Who are you?" she whispered. Before Jackson could answer, the final boarding call for the Boston flight echoed through the terminal. "We need to board," Madeline said, her voice shaking slightly. "I can't miss this flight. My new job starts Monday." "My name is Jackson Hayes," he said quickly. "I was Mark's best friend in college. Please, can we talk on the plane? I'm on the same flight." Madeline hesitated, 1,000 questions racing through her mind. This man knew Mark, the same Mark who had abandoned them without a backward glance. What could he possibly have to say that she would want to hear? Yet something in Jackson's expression, earnestness perhaps, or a shadow of grief she recognized all too well, made her nod slowly. "Seat 14A, she said, "but I'm not promising anything." As they headed toward the gate, neither could have imagined how a lost stuffed elephant would change the course of both their lives forever. The airplane hummed steadily at cruising altitude. Noah finally settled after a fussy takeoff. Madeline glanced at the empty seat beside her, wondering if Jackson Hayes had merely been making conversation at the airport. Perhaps he'd recognized an opportunity to appear heroic, and then conveniently disappeared. It wouldn't be the first time a man had made empty promises in her life. She stroked Noah's hair as he clutched Ellie, his eyelids growing heavy. Just as she resigned herself to flying solo, a familiar figure appeared in the aisle. "Sorry for the delay," Jackson said, slightly out of breath. "The flight attendant had me in 22C. I had to explain the situation." He hesitated, gesturing to the empty seat beside her. "May I?" Madeline nodded cautiously. Up close, she noticed the flecks of grey at his temples that belied his otherwise youthful appearance, the expensive watch that peeked from beneath his cuff, and the tension in his shoulders as he sat down. "How did you know Mark?" she asked without preamble, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Noah. Jackson loosened his tie, choosing his words carefully. "We were roommates at Northwestern, became close friends, stayed that way after graduation." He paused, studying Noah's sleeping face. "He has Mark's chin, doesn't he?" The observation caught Madeline off guard. It was the kind of detail only someone who truly knew Mark would notice. "Yes," she admitted, "among other things." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Madeline had spent years imagining what she would say if she ever saw Mark again, rehearsing cutting remarks and demands for explanations, but confronting his friend instead felt like punching a ghost. "He told me about you," Jackson finally said, staring straight ahead, "before he left." Madeline's fingers tightened around the armrest. "Did he also tell you he walked out when I was 7 months pregnant? That he promised to call but never did?" The bitterness she'd worked so hard to overcome seeped into her voice. "That he sent one stuffed elephant with a note saying he was sorry, but he couldn't be a father." Jackson winced. "He did. Not all at once, but over time." He turned to face her. "What he didn't tell you was that he tried to come back." Madeline's breath caught. "What?" "6 months after Noah was born, Mark called me. Said he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. He was driving to see you when the accident happened. Jackson swallowed hard. He never made it. The revelation hit Madeline like a physical blow. All these years, she'd believed Mark had simply abandoned them, choosing a carefree life over responsibility. The possibility that he'd changed his mind, that death rather than indifference had kept him away, rewrote a narrative she'd built her life around. He died, she whispered, the anger that had sustained her suddenly draining away, leaving confusion in its wake. Why didn't anyone tell me? He had changed his phone, moved apartments. His parents had disowned him years before. Jackson ran a hand through his hair. I tried to find you after the funeral, but you'd already moved from your old address. All I had was your first name. Noah stirred in his sleep, snuggling closer to Ellie. Madeline automatically adjusted his blanket, her movements mechanical, as her mind raced to process this new information. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted. For 3 years, I've told myself Mark was selfish, that we were better off without him. I've used that anger to push forward, to be stronger for Noah. She met Jackson's gaze, her eyes glistening. What am I supposed to feel now? Whatever you need to, he replied softly. Mark made a terrible mistake leaving you. The fact that he realized it doesn't erase that. The flight attendant approached with the beverage cart, temporarily halting their conversation. Jackson ordered a whiskey, Madeline a ginger ale. When they were alone again, she studied him more carefully. Why are you really going to Boston, Jackson? You seemed surprised when I mentioned it at the airport. He considered lying, then thought better of it. I was supposed to be on a flight to Singapore. I changed it when I realized who you were. Why would you do that? Madeline asked, genuinely perplexed. You don't know me. Because I made a promise, Jackson replied, rotating the small plastic cup between his fingers. At Mark's memorial last week. His parents weren't there. Still haven't forgiven him for dropping out of law school to join my startup. I was the only one who knew the truth about you and Noah. He took a sip of whiskey. I promised I'd make things right if I ever found you. I just never expected it to happen like this. Madeline's skepticism was evident. And what exactly does making things right entail? Money, because we don't need charity. That's not what I meant, Jackson said quickly. I don't know. I felt responsible in a way. I encouraged Mark to join my company right out of college. The pressure, the long hours, it wasn't conducive to starting a family. He sighed. I should have supported him better when he told me about the pregnancy. Instead, I was focused on our next funding round. Noah awoke with a small whimper, blinking sleepily. His eyes found Jackson, regarding the stranger with curious innocence. After a moment, he offered Ellie toward Jackson with a generous toddler gesture. Elle, Noah said solemnly. Jackson hesitated, then gently accepted the worn elephant. Thank you, Noah. That's very kind. Madeline watched the interaction, her heart constricting. Noah had never known his father, would never have those crucial moments that shaped a child's understanding of the world. The thought that Mark had wanted to return, to be part of their lives, opened a wound she thought had long since scarred over. You mentioned a new job in Boston? Jackson asked, carefully returning Ellie to Noah, who immediately snuggled it against his cheek. Marketing director for a non-profit, Madeline explained, grateful for the change in subject. Better hours, better pay than my position in Chicago. I've arranged a small apartment near the office with a daycare on the same block. Which non-profit? Jackson asked. Second Chance Foundation. They provide resources for single parents. A hint of pride crept into her voice. I've been volunteering with their Chicago branch for years. When the Boston position opened up, it felt like fate. Recognition flickered across Jackson's face. Second Chance. My company is one of their biggest donors. Hayes Innovation sponsors their annual gala. Madeline stared at him, the coincidence too perfect to be believable. You're joking. I'm not, Jackson insisted. Check their website. Our logo is on their partners page. He paused, a realization dawning. Wait, you're the new marketing director? I approved that budget expansion last quarter. The irony wasn't lost on Madeline. After years of struggling alone, determined to succeed without help, she had unwittingly accepted a position partially funded by Mark's best friend. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. This is too much, she murmured, turning to look out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. 3 years of nothing, and suddenly all these connections appear out of nowhere. I understand if you want me to back off, Jackson said after a moment. I've dropped a lot on you all at once, but I'm going to be in Boston for a few days, and he faltered, unsure how to express what he was feeling, this strange mix of obligation, curiosity, and something deeper he couldn't name. I'd like to help you get settled if you'll let me. Madeline faced him again, studying the earnest expression on his face. There was something trustworthy about Jackson Hayes, despite the circumstances of their meeting. Or perhaps she was simply tired of doing everything alone, of being both mother and father, provider and nurturer with no one to share the burden. I don't know you, she said finally, and you don't know me. Whatever friendship you had with Mark doesn't automatically extend to us. I understand, Jackson said, trying to mask his disappointment. But, Madeline continued, surprising herself, Noah should know something about his father besides the fact that he left. If you have stories, memories that might someday help my son understand where he came from. She trailed off, the offer hanging between them. Before Jackson could respond, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into Boston. Noah began fussing again, ears popping with the pressure change. Madeline rummaged through her bag for a pacifier. Here, Jackson said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a small wooden puzzle, the kind meant to keep restless executives occupied during long meetings. This might distract him. The pieces are too big to swallow. Madeline accepted the offering with a tentative smile. You're good with children for a CEO. My sister has twins, Jackson explained. I've learned a few tricks. As Noah became engrossed in the puzzle, Madeline made a decision. She pulled a business card from her wallet, one of the new ones with the Second Chance logo, and handed it to Jackson. We're staying at the Residence Inn until our apartment is ready next week. Maybe you could stop by tomorrow evening. Bring dinner. The invitation felt like stepping off a cliff, but sometimes life required leaps of faith. Nothing fancy. Noah likes mac and cheese. Jackson accepted the card with more gratitude than the simple gesture warranted. Mac and cheese it is. He slipped it carefully into his jacket pocket, as if it contained something far more valuable than just contact information. As the plane descended toward Boston, neither spoke of the strange coincidence that had brought them together, or of the man whose absence connected them. Instead, they watched Noah play with the puzzle, his small fingers working with determined concentration, Ellie the elephant, tucked safely under his arm. The next evening found Madeline nervously straightening the already tidy hotel suite. Noah, freshly bathed and dressed in dinosaur pajamas, played with wooden blocks on the floor, occasionally glancing at the door as if sensing his mother's anticipation. It's just dinner, Noah, Madeline said, more to herself than to her son. She checked her reflection in the mirror, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. She'd changed outfits twice before settling on simple jeans and a blue sweater, casual enough to suggest this wasn't a date, but nice enough to feel like she'd made an effort. At precisely 6 o'clock, a knock sounded at the door. Madeline took a deep breath before opening it to find Jackson standing there, arms laden with bags from a local restaurant. The expensive suit from yesterday had been replaced by dark jeans and a grey Henley that somehow made him look more approachable. I may have gone overboard, he admitted with a sheepish smile. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got mac and cheese for Noah, plus pasta primavera, chicken parmesan, and a Caesar salad. He lifted another bag, and chocolate cake for dessert. Feeding an army, Madeline teased, stepping aside to let him in. The tension she'd anticipated dissolved in the face of his obvious nervousness. Cake, Noah exclaimed, abandoning his blocks to investigate the newcomer and his treasures. Jackson set the bags on the small kitchenette counter, then crouched to Noah's level. That's right, buddy. Chocolate cake for later if your mom says it's okay. Noah studied Jackson with the unfiltered curiosity of a toddler before offering him a red block. Build? I'd be honored, Jackson replied seriously, accepting the block. He glanced up at Madeline. Is it okay if we play while you set up dinner? She nodded, strangely moved by the simple request. Of course. As she unpacked the food, arranging it on the hotel plates, Madeline watched Jackson and Noah on the floor. The CEO seemed completely at ease, sitting cross-legged, following Noah's incomprehensible instructions for building a tower. There was an ease to their interaction that made her chest tighten. He's incredible, Jackson said as she called them to the table. Smart, focused. He's going to be something special. He already is, Madeline replied, helping Noah into his booster seat. She cut his mac and cheese into smaller pieces, cooling it with gentle blows, though I'm admittedly biased. Over dinner, the conversation flowed more naturally than Madeline had expected. Jackson told her about growing up in Michigan, with dreams of building computers, about meeting Mark in their freshman dorm, and immediately bonding over terrible music and worse fashion choices. Mark was the life of every party, Jackson recalled, a fond smile playing at his lips. Could charm anyone, professors, girls, even campus security that time He glanced at Noah, wisely reconsidering the anecdote. Let's just say we narrowly avoided academic probation. That sounds like the Mark I knew, Madeline admitted, allowing herself to remember the good parts, his infectious laugh, his spontaneity, the way he'd wooed her with outrageous public gestures that had both embarrassed and delighted her. When we first started dating, he filled my car with sunflowers because I mentioned they were my favorite. I found petals in the air vents for months. They shared more stories as they ate, piecing together different versions of the same man, the brilliant friend, the charming boyfriend, the reluctant father. For the first time, Madeline allowed herself to speak of Mark, without bitterness coloring every memory. After dinner, while Noah enjoyed a small piece of chocolate cake that guaranteed a sugar-fueled bedtime battle later, Jackson's expression grew serious. "There's something else I should tell you," he said, wiping his hands on a napkin. "Something about Mark that might help explain, though not excuse, why he left." Madeline tensed. "I'm listening. Mark's father was harsh, demanding perfection, punishing failure. Nothing Mark did was ever good enough." Jackson leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The night before Mark left you, he called me in a panic, said he'd heard himself speaking to your unborn child in his father's voice, making the same promises about legacy and expectations. It terrified him." "So he ran," Madeline said flatly. "He ran," Jackson agreed. "He convinced himself you and the baby would be better off without him passing on that toxic pattern." He met her eyes. "I'm not defending him. What he did was cowardly, but in his twisted way he thought he was protecting Noah." Madeline absorbed this, watching Noah happily smear chocolate across his face. "He could have talked to me. We could have worked through it together." "Mark wasn't great at asking for help," Jackson said quietly. "None of us were back then, too young, too proud." He hesitated. "The elephant, Ellie, was his way of reaching out. He bought it the day he decided to come back. Said it would be his peace offering." Noah, as if sensing the conversation had turned to his beloved toy, retrieved Ellie from the couch and hugged her close, chocolate fingerprints adding new stains to the well-worn fabric. "I should get him ready for bed," Madeline said, suddenly needing space to process everything. "It's past his bedtime." "Of course." Jackson stood, gathering the empty containers. "I should go. Thank you for tonight, Madeline." As he headed for the door, Noah broke away from Madeline and toddled after Jackson, wrapping his small arms around the man's leg. "Stay," he demanded with the imperial certainty of a 2.5-year-old. Jackson froze, looking to Madeline with helpless confusion. She approached, gently disentangling Noah from Jackson's leg. "It's bedtime, sweetie. Jackson needs to go to his own hotel." To Jackson, she added, "He's not usually this clingy with strangers." "Maybe it's the chocolate cake," Jackson suggested, but they both sensed it was something more. Some inexplicable connection forming between Noah and this link to his father. After Jackson left, promising to call the next day, Madeline went through Noah's bedtime routine on autopilot, her mind churning with new information and unexpected emotions. Once Noah was finally asleep, Ellie clutched tight against his chest. She opened her laptop and did something she'd resisted for years. She searched for information about Mark's death. The accident report was brief: single car crash on a rainy night. Driver lost control on Highway 41 heading north from Chicago. No alcohol involved, no passengers. The date aligned exactly with what Jackson had told her, 6 months after Noah's birth. Further searching revealed a small obituary that mentioned Mark's accomplishments at Hayes Innovations, his college years, his parents, and a sister. No mention of a son, no mention of her, as if that chapter of his life had been erased. She closed the laptop, unsure whether the confirmation made her feel better or worse. Part of her had hoped Jackson was mistaken or lying, that the narrative she'd constructed to protect herself could remain intact. The truth was messier, more painful, more human. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jackson. "I have meetings until 3 tomorrow, but I'd like to show you and Noah something after if you're free. It's important." Madeline stared at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. The rational part of her brain urged caution. She hardly knew this man. His connection to her life was tenuous at best, built on memories of someone who no longer existed, yet something deeper, more intuitive, pushed her to respond. "We're free after Noah's nap around 2:30. What did you have in mind?" His reply came quickly. "I'll pick you up at 3. Dress warmly." The next afternoon, after a morning spent unpacking and organizing their temporary home, Madeline waited in the hotel lobby with Noah. She'd dressed them both in warm layers as instructed, curious and slightly apprehensive about Jackson's mysterious plans. He arrived precisely at 3, this time in a rental SUV with a car seat already installed in the back, a thoughtful detail that didn't escape Madeline's notice. "Where are we going?" she asked as Jackson navigated through Boston's congested streets. "It's about a 40-minute drive," he replied, glancing in the rearview mirror at Noah, who was contentedly watching the city pass by. "I was going to tell you more about Mark's last few months, but I realized it would be better to show you." They drove north out of the city, the urban landscape gradually giving way to suburbs, then to more rural areas with sprawling properties set back from the road. Eventually, Jackson turned onto a private drive that wound through trees, just beginning to show their full colors. At the end of the drive stood a charming 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a red front door. "What is this place?" Madeline asked as Jackson parked. He turned off the engine, staring at the house with an expression she couldn't quite read. "This was Mark's project after he left you. He bought it, was renovating it himself." Jackson turned to face her. "For you and Noah." Madeline's breath caught. "I don't understand." "When Mark realized his mistake, he didn't just decide to come back. He wanted to create a home for you, away from the city, away from the stress that he believed had triggered his worst fears about fatherhood." Jackson gestured to the house. "He worked on it every weekend for months, learning as he went. Called it his redemption project. But how do you know all this? How is this place still—" Madeline struggled to form the questions racing through her mind. "I was the executor of his estate," Jackson explained. "His parents wanted nothing to do with it. I found the deed, the plans, his journal entries about the renovation." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a set of keys. "I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Something told me to wait, that somehow, someday." He trailed off, looking embarrassed by what might seem like sentimentality. Noah began fussing to be released from his car seat. Madeline unbuckled him automatically, her eyes never leaving the red door. "Would you like to see inside?" Jackson asked gently. The house was beautiful. Original hardwood floors, large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. A kitchen with white cabinets and a farmhouse sink. It was partially furnished, some rooms complete, others clearly works in progress. The main bedroom and Noah's room were finished, Jackson explained as he led them upstairs. Mark completed those first. The nursery made Madeline's heart clench. Painted a soft green, it featured a handcrafted wooden crib, a rocking chair, and shelves filled with children's books. On the wall hung a framed ultrasound image. Her ultrasound image. She'd given it to Mark months before he left. "How did he get this?" she whispered, touching the frame with trembling fingers. "He kept everything," Jackson said quietly. "Every picture, every note. He had a box full of things he couldn't bring himself to leave behind, even when he thought he was doing the right thing by walking away." Noah explored the room with delight, immediately claiming the small table and chairs as his domain. He seemed completely at ease, as if recognizing on some level that this space had been created with him in mind. In the master bedroom, Madeline found a king-sized bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser with delicate carvings, and a note framed on the wall in Mark's unmistakable handwriting, "For second chances." "I don't know what to say," Madeline admitted, overwhelmed by the physical evidence of Mark's regret and hope. "This is too much," Jackson suggested, concern evident in his expression. "I debated whether to show you at all. I don't want you to feel pressured or manipulated." "No, it's not that," Madeline said. "It's just all this time I thought he never looked back, that he'd forgotten us completely." "He never forgot," Jackson assured her. "Not for a single day." As they stood in the room that Mark had prepared for a future that never arrived, Madeline felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. Not because of lingering love for Mark, that had faded long ago, replaced by resilience and self-reliance, but because the narrative that had defined her life as a single mother had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. "What happens to this place now?" she asked, following Noah back downstairs. Jackson hesitated. "Legally, it belongs to Noah. Mark's will left everything to his child. I've been maintaining it as trustee." He paused on the porch, watching Noah explore the front yard with unbridled curiosity. "But what happens next is entirely up to you, Madeline." She leaned against the porch railing, feeling the solid wood beneath her hands. Wood that Mark had touched, had restored with purpose and hope. The future stretched before her, suddenly filled with possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine. "I need time," she said finally. "This is a lot to process." "Of course," Jackson nodded. "Take all the time you need. The house isn't going anywhere." He smiled, watching Noah chase a butterfly across the lawn. "Neither am I." As the afternoon light gilded the autumn trees, casting long shadows across the property that should have been their family home, Madeline realized that the lost elephant at the airport hadn't just connected her to Mark's past. It had opened a door to a future she never expected. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur as Madeline settled into her new position at Second Chance Foundation. Her days quickly filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and the familiar chaos of balancing work with single motherhood. Noah had adapted quickly to his new daycare, charming the staff with his infectious giggle and boundless energy. Jackson had kept his distance since showing her the farmhouse, texting occasionally to check in, but respecting her need for space. His restraint only made Madeline think about him more, about his kindness toward Noah, his candor about Mark, and the inexplicable connection that had formed between them in such a short time. On a crisp Friday afternoon, Madeline sat in her new office reviewing donor engagement strategies when her assistant appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here to see you," the young woman said with barely concealed excitement. "Jackson Hayes." Madeline's heart skipped as Jackson stepped into view, looking slightly out of place in his tailored suit among the non-profit's casual environment. He carried a small gift bag and wore an uncertain expression. "I should have called first," he said, lingering in the doorway. "I can come back another time." "No, it's fine." Madeline gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I was just finishing up." After her assistant left, closing the door with meaningful discretion, Madeline raised an eyebrow at Jackson. "You've caused quite a stir. The CEO of Hayes Innovations doesn't usually hand-deliver donations." "I'm not here as a donor," Jackson replied, setting the gift bag on her desk, "though I did bring something for Noah." At her curious look, he explained, "A stuffed giraffe. Thought Ellie might need a friend." The thoughtful gesture touched Madeline more than she cared to admit. "He'll love it, thank you." An awkward silence settled between them, filled with unspoken questions. "I thought you'd returned to Chicago," Madeline said finally. "It's been 2 weeks." Jackson rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "I was supposed to, but I've been working remotely, handling things from the Boston office." He met her eyes. "Truth is, I couldn't leave without knowing if you'd made any decisions about the house." Madeline had thought of little else since their visit to the farmhouse. She'd even driven out there alone one evening, after Noah had fallen asleep at the hotel, walking the property in the moonlight, trying to imagine what life might be like away from the city's constant hum. "I've been thinking about it," she admitted. "The practical side of me says it's crazy. The commute would be long. Noah would need a different daycare. And the house." She paused, remembering the unfinished spaces, the projects left abandoned. "It needs work." "But," Jackson prompted, sensing her hesitation, "but every logical argument gets drowned out by how right it felt being there." Madeline sighed. "Noah hasn't stopped talking about the big house since our visit. He asks when we can go back almost daily." Jackson's expression brightened. "Children have good instincts. They also think ice cream for breakfast is a good idea," Madeline countered with a small smile. "Fair point." Jackson leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Listen, I didn't come here to pressure you. Whatever you decide about the house is your choice. But I did want to make you an offer." Madeline tensed, immediately wary. "What kind of offer?" "Not what you're thinking," Jackson assured her. "I want to help finish the renovations. No strings attached. Mark would have wanted the house completed, whether you choose to live there or sell it." "Why would you do that?" Madeline asked. "You've already done more than enough, maintaining the property all these years." Jackson was quiet for a moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "When Mark died, I was angry with him, for leaving you, for not fighting harder for his second chance." He met her gaze directly. "I've spent 3 years feeling like I failed my best friend by not getting him back to you in time. This feels like a way to finally make good on that promise I made at his memorial." Madeline studied him, seeing beyond the successful businessman to the loyal friend beneath, a man burdened by a guilt that wasn't rightfully his to bear. "Mark made his own choices," she said gently. "His death was a tragedy, but not your responsibility." "I know that logically," Jackson admitted. "But logic and emotion don't always align." The words hung between them, carrying weight beyond the discussion of Mark's legacy. Madeline glanced at the clock. "I need to pick up Noah soon." "Of course." Jackson stood, straightening his jacket. "Think about my offer. No pressure, no timeline." "Actually," Madeline said, making a split-second decision, "Noah has been asking to see the house again. Would you like to join us for dinner there tonight? We could talk more about the renovations." Jackson's surprise quickly gave way to a warm smile. "I'd like that very much." That evening, as Noah explored the backyard of the farmhouse, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk, Madeline and Jackson sat on the porch steps with takeout containers and wine in paper cups. "I can't believe I'm considering this," Madeline confessed, watching her son's delighted face as he captured a glowing insect in his cupped hands. 3 weeks ago, my plan was a small apartment, daycare down the hall, everything neat and contained." "And now?" Jackson asked, his shoulder close enough to hers that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Now I'm picturing Noah growing up here, having space to run, room for a dog eventually." She took a sip of wine. "It's terrifying and exciting all at once." "The best decisions usually are," Jackson said. He hesitated, then added, "I have a confession to make." Madeline turned to him, eyebrows raised expectantly. "I found a contractor's estimate in Mark's papers," he explained, "for finishing the renovations. It's substantial, more than Noah's trust can cover right now." "Oh," Madeline's enthusiasm dimmed. "I can't afford major renovations on my salary." "That's part of my offer," Jackson clarified. "I want to fund the completion as a gift to Noah and to Mark's memory." Madeline stiffened. "That's too much, Jackson. I can't accept that." "What if it wasn't a gift?" he suggested. "What if it was an investment? I help finish the house, and in return I get to visit sometimes, spend time with Noah, maybe teach him to fish in that pond we saw on the property." The proposal hung between them, not quite charity, but something more complicated, more personal. Madeline watched Noah, who had abandoned his firefly hunt, to examine something in the grass with intense concentration. "He needs male role models in his life," she said quietly, "positive ones." "I'd like to be that," Jackson admitted, "if you'll let me." He quickly added, "At whatever distance you're comfortable with. I know we've only known each other a short time." Madeline considered how quickly Jackson had gone from stranger to something else. Not quite a friend, not exactly family, but someone who seemed to understand the complex emotions that came with raising Mark's child. Someone who looked at Noah with genuine affection rather than obligation. "Let's start with finishing the house," she decided. "One step at a time." Jackson nodded, relief evident in his relaxed shoulders. One step at a time. Over the next few months, the farmhouse gradually transformed. Weekends found them all there, Madeline choosing paint colors and fixtures, Jackson working alongside the contractors he'd hired, and Noah supervising with his growing collection of stuffed animals, Ellie the elephant always in a place of honor. As winter melted into spring, Madeline found herself drawn to the farmhouse more and more. The hotel had long since been exchanged for a month-to-month apartment closer to work, but increasingly, the apartment felt like a way station rather than a home. It wasn't just the house that pulled her. It was the man who showed up faithfully each weekend with coffee and donuts, who built a tree swing for Noah, who never pushed for more than she was ready to give. On a sunny April morning, as Madeline watched Jackson patiently teaching Noah how to plant sunflower seeds along the garden fence, she finally acknowledged the feeling that had been growing inside her for months. This wasn't about Mark anymore, or obligations to the past. This was about the future, her future, Noah's future, and possibly Jackson's too. That evening, After Noah had been tucked into bed in what was now fully his room, complete with a toddler bed and space-themed nightlight, Madeline joined Jackson on the porch swing. "The contractors say they'll be finished by the end of next week," Jackson told her, gently pushing the swing with his foot, just in time for moving day. Madeline had given notice at her apartment the previous month, finally committing to making the farmhouse their home. The commute would be challenging, but she'd negotiated a partial work-from-home arrangement that made it manageable. "I can't believe how much has changed in 7 months," she said, thinking back to that moment in the airport when a lost stuffed elephant had altered the course of her life. "Sometimes I wonder what Mark would think of all this." Jackson considered her question seriously. "I think he'd be grateful that Noah has the home he wanted to provide. That you're happy." He paused, then added quietly, "I think he'd understand that life moves forward even when we're not ready." Madeline turned to face him, gathering her courage. "Speaking of moving forward, I've been thinking." "A dangerous pastime," Jackson teased gently. "Very funny." She rolled her eyes but smiled despite herself. "I've been thinking about us, about what happens after the renovations are complete." Jackson stilled the swing, giving her his full attention. "What would you like to happen?" "I'd like you to still be part of our lives," Madeline said carefully, "not just as Mark's friend or Noah's benefactor, but as something more." The words felt both terrifying and liberating to speak aloud. A slow smile spread across Jackson's face, hope replacing the careful restraint he'd maintained for months. "I'd like that too, very much." "It won't be simple," Madeline warned. "Noah comes first, always, and there's the ghost of Mark to contend with." "I've never expected simple," Jackson replied, taking her hand. "But some things are worth the complexity." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Noah appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Ellie clutched firmly in one hand. "Mommy! Jack!" he called, using the nickname he'd given Jackson months ago. They both turned, Jackson dropping Madeline's hand reflexively. But Noah had already seen the gesture and smiled with sleepy approval. "What are you doing out of bed, mister?" Madeline asked, opening her arms as Noah padded toward them in his footy pajamas. "Ellie wanted to see the stars," Noah explained, with the impeccable logic of a 3-year-old. He climbed onto the swing between them, settling comfortably as if he belonged exactly there. Jackson pointed to the clear night sky above them. "See that bright one there? That's the North Star. Sailors used it to find their way home." Noah leaned against Jackson's side, eyes wide with wonder. How did they know which one? As Jackson launched into a simplified explanation of celestial navigation, Madeline watched them together, this man who had appeared in their lives by chance or fate, or some combination of the two, and her son, who had accepted him with the uncomplicated openness that children possess. They weren't a conventional family. Their origin story was complicated, touched by loss and missed chances. But sitting there on the porch of the house that Mark had started and Jackson had finished, watching the stars with her son nestled between them, Madeline felt something she hadn't expected to find again, the sense of possibility, of a future bright with promise. Later, after Noah had been returned to bed, Jackson and Madeline stood in the doorway, reluctant to end the evening. "What did Mark write in that note?" Jackson asked suddenly. "The one that came with Ellie? You never said." Madeline hadn't thought about the note in years, but the words came back to her immediately. It said, "Sometimes love takes the long way home." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. He always did have a way with words. "Yes," Madeline agreed, stepping closer to Jackson, "and sometimes he was even right." As Jackson's arms encircled her, Madeline reflected on the twisted path that had led them here, a path marked by loss and absence, but ultimately guided towards something new and unexpected. It wasn't the life she had planned, but standing in the doorway of the home that now truly belonged to her and Noah, with Jackson's steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, Madeline knew it was exactly where they were meant to be. A blue stuffed elephant with a worn tag bearing the name Noah Parker sat on a shelf in the child's bedroom upstairs, watching over the sleeping boy, a silent witness to how sometimes the things we lose find their way back to us in ways we never could have imagined.